Well, hello everybody, sitting here in the late spring sunshine. The title of the video, Royal Enfields and me, what's that all about? Well, I've had loads of comments over the years from people on the comments and in real life, in person. People come up to me and say, what is it about Royal Enfields that you like then? You know, why do you got so many of them? You know, why are you obsessed with Royal Enfield? Well, I'm not obsessed with Royal Enfield at all. I like them, yeah, and I've got other bikes as well. So this video, I thought, I'll get a bit fed up about answering those comments because it's the same old question all the time. Why do I like Royal Enfields? Right, well, you've got to go back to when I was 19, about 3 years ago now. Yeah, about 3 years ago when I was 19, and I passed my riding test on my 17th birthday on a matchless G3 telly rigid with a sidecar on it. And I don't even know if you can pass your test with a sidecar on nowadays, but I did. I went through it first time. Then when I was 19, I bought a Royal Enfield Meteor 700 with a Busma double adult sidecar on it. And that bike was the most worn out, tired, dilapidated. If anything was due for a rebuild, that bike was. But, here's the but. It always started. First or second kick in the summer and 3 kicks in the winter. And I rode that bike for about a year and a half. And then I got rid of it because I got offered a BSA Gold Flash with a single adult Busma double with a single Busma sidecar, single adult one. And it was much better condition than the Meteor, because the Meteor that could use half a gallon of oil in 10 miles. I mean, it used to leak half of it and burn the rest. I knew where it was all going. All the oil was accounted for. It was all just going. And in the end, I was just putting waste oil in it because I didn't care about it. It was just an old thing. I was 19, I didn't care, you know. But it always got me to where I wanted to go. And that counts for a lot, doesn't it? And as soon as I swapped for the BSA, I thought I missed that Meteor, you know. But the bloke wouldn't do a deal back. I did ask him, but he said no. So, moving forward a few years, I bought a Royal Enfield Crusader. I had that for about a month and probably got about 9 miles out of it and ended up walking about 18. That was not a reliable bike, and so I outed that. And I never had another Royal Enfield for quite some years, but this is where it comes into where this liking for Royal Enfields come from. It comes down to one man, and that man is Andy Tannon. You've all seen his videos. I mean, they've all had over 20,000 views. If you don't know who Andy Tannon is, you're one of 3 people in the world that doesn't. He's arguably the biggest classic British bike dealer in the country. And he has had tens of thousands of British bikes through his hands over the years. I'm not kidding you not, it's just endless. I mean, even now there's 10, 15 every week going in, out and coming in. So, I've known Andy for about 46 years now. I've known Andy bought my mattress that I passed my test on. I sold it to him. When I first met him, he was, we've got pussycats in the background here. When I first met him, he was in a little shed behind his mum's bungalow in Kesgrave, and that's where he started. And then he went to Gloucester Road and had a bit on the old aerodrome there in a hangar. There was a bit of the hangar, and he was in there for a while. And that's where he took his right-hand man on there, his right-hand man, Dave. Now Dave his proper name was Dave Berry, and because of his surname, everybody called him Barrett, and it stuck for years and years and years. So he's just known as Barrett, and he was a very, very clever man, and he was a BSA man through and through. But anyway, moving forward a few more decades forward, I called in Andy's one morning to go and get some oil, because Andy always sold oil, and like he does now, he still sells oil. He's got his own branded oil now. And as I pulled into his drive to the premises that are in the videos, I'll leave a link in the description for all the videos about his place, and you can see what he's all about if you don't know who he is. And there was a 40-foot container on an articulated lorry coming out of the drive, and so I gave way for him, and it was banging fairly through the potholes, and so I thought, well, it's empty, and I couldn't see Andy's place because this container was in the way. Anyway, it drew past me out onto the main road, and I looked up at Andy's place, and I thought, oh my God, look at this lot. There was about over 100 mopeds just dotted about in the yard, and Andy was squatting down working on one, and I pulled up. I think I was on the Triumph TR6 at the time, the trophy, you know, single carb one. And I took my helmet and gloves off and that, and looked across at him, and I said, what have you done? And he just laughed at me, and he said, yes, his number plate dealer had all these. He said, you used to store the numbers on them. He said, because in those days, if you took a number plate off a vehicle, it had to go straight onto another one. Now you can take the number off and put it on retention, which is just a piece of paper, and you hold that number until you go buy a vehicle and you can put it on. So you don't have to put it on straight onto a vehicle when you buy a number. If you buy a number from Swansea, you can have it on retention and then look for the vehicle, put it on, and you know, all that sort of stuff. But back in that day, you had to put it on a vehicle. So the number plate dealers were buying up mopeds like they were going out of fashion, because they were cheap. You stick a number on, you know, store it on that. And then when it went over to paper, all these mopeds started to appear on the market, and Andy bought loads of them. So he said, yeah, they could all be yours if you want. He said, just give me a small profit on each one. He said, you can own them. And I said, yeah, I'll give that a miss, I think. I've got enough mopeds of my own. I said, I've had them for years. And I've still got them. And he said, yeah, yeah. He said, what are you after then? I said, oil, engine oil. He said, yeah, I've got plenty of that, don't worry about that. He said, yeah, look, while you're here, he said, do us a favour. I said, what's that? He said, just have a look at these mopeds, he said, roundabout. He said, just pick some that look like they might run. He said, try and get them going. I said, well, which ones? He said, well, just find, look for complete ones. If they look like they're complete and they might run, try them. I said, yeah, right. So I thought, okay. So I looked around, and there was an NSU quickly. And I looked down at it, and the exhaust was on it, and the carburetor was on it, and the plug was in the hole, and the cap was on the plug. And I thought, that looks fairly complete. I took the petrol cap off, smelt in the tank, and it smelt fairly fresh petrol. So I thought, I might go. So I turned the tap on, and I watched the little bubble go down the petrol pipe. So I thought, yes, filling the carburetor up, flicked the choke on, got the pedal up to the top of the stroke, opened the throttle a little bit, gave it a good old kick on the pedals, and the engine fell right out of the bike, laid underneath the bike. So I looked across at Andy, and he said, yeah, don't worry about that. He said, just move on to the next one. Don't waste time on them. Don't waste time on them. So I said, all right then. So I said, what about these? He said, any of them, just I've got to get some runners out of this. There's got to be some runners. I can't have them all knackered and dead, he said. I said, all right. Well, I looked across, and there was 4 rally runabouts in a line. And I thought, well, they'll always go, because I've got them. If they don't go, it'll be a bad plug or a block jet. That's normally all it is. Anyway, I got all 4 of those going, and they all ran really well. And next to those was 2 mobilettes, about the same era, 60s mobilettes, same engines as the rallies. So I picked those and put a bit of two-stroke in one and got that one running, and fiddled about a bit with the other one and got that one running. And Andy come over and he said, hey, you're all about, aren't you? Handy with the old spanners. And I said, well, I'm picking the easiest ones. He said, yeah, don't pick ones that work. Want work. We don't need any more work. We've got enough work as it is. I said, okay. So I said, how's my oil getting on? He said, oh, we're going to just about put the kettle on. Do you want a cup of tea? I said, yeah, go on then. So I was stayed outside with the bikes, and he came out with a cup of tea, and he said, yeah, he said, got to make progress on these. And I said, yeah. He said, I've got to get them all done by Monday. I said, Monday? I said, why Monday? He said, the start of the new working week. I can't be doing with this lot lying about. He said, people coming and going. He said, it'd be mental. He said, and if Jo, that's his wife, Jo, she's a little Chinese person, if she sees them all, she'll go mad. I said, don't she know you bought them then? He said, no. He said, don't tell her. He said, well, I'll get them all squirreled away before she comes down on Monday. I said, right. Because his wife, she's got the personality of a Rottweiler. She can't seem to realise that Andy's made his money from buying rusty old motorbikes and selling them. And she can't bear him buying anything. So, I think she holds the purse strings, I think, a bit. So, anyway, I worked and I thought, it's nearly 6 o'clock. I said, it's nearly 6 o'clock, Andy. I said, I'm going home. He said, yeah. He said, had enough? I said, yeah, I have. I've had enough now. I said, we've got several of them running. He said, yeah. Cheers for that. He says, what are you up to tomorrow then? I said, I don't know. I said, I'll probably take a ride out to Clacton or somewhere like that. And I looked at him and he looked sort of really disappointed. And I said, I know what you want. He said, what's that? I said, you want me to come here tomorrow, don't you? Fixing mopeds. He said, be dead handy if you would. I said, I said, all right then. He said, 7:30? I said, what, on a Sunday morning? I said, you can forget that. I'll be here about 9. He said, yeah, 8:30 then. I said, all right. So I went home, came back the next morning at 8 o'clock, and he was already there, fiddling about with these bikes. And we worked and we worked and we worked and we worked, and we got more and more and more of them running. And Andy got more and more relieved that they did run. And then he said, it was getting sort of fairly late on Sunday evening. And I said, well, I don't know about you, but I'm going to pull the pin on it now, so I can go home. I said, I'm starving, I want something to eat. He said, yeah, how's the earth moving going then? And I said, well, we're just about done for this season now. I said, well, we've done the last job. I can't see anything else started now because it was late September. I said, we don't normally work through the winter. Yeah, he said, I thought, here we go. Monday? I said, what? Monday? Can you make it Monday? I said, well, here? Yeah, you could be the man. And I said, yeah, all right then, go on then. I said, you're going to have to make this right with me, I said, I'm not going to do this for nothing. Nah, don't worry about that, I'll put you right, don't worry. So I thought, well, okay then. So Monday morning I turned up, and Barrett turned up on his B31, which he bought from Andy. And Andy had imported it from Ghana, and it was completely wore out, but Barrett bought it. And he completely rebuilt that bike. And he put 100,000 miles on that, just coming and to and froing from where he lived at Enfield'S to Framlingham. 25 miles each way, so he's commuting 50 miles a day on it. And he put 100,000 miles on that bike. And he was going to, I said, what are you going to do with it when you've got 100,000 miles on it? He said, restore it. I said, yeah, but it'd just be another restored bike then, wouldn't it? I said, at least it looks like it's done a bit. Yeah, I'll have to think about it. He said, I've got my B33 now to replace it, which he'd rebuilt. And more about that in a little while. But anyway, so I started working there on the Monday. And he said, what are you doing here, Shag? I said, I'm mopeds. Oh, he went, rather you than me. And I said, well, I think that's the reason he's got me here, so that I'm doing them and you're not. And he said, good job and all. He said, yeah. He said, nice to see you. I said, yeah. And I'd known Dave for as long as I've known Andy, and I've never worked with him. But what a character, what a guy he was. He really was. And I worked on the Monday, and Andy said, you can use this bench. He said, nobody else is using it. And there was another guy that worked there part-time called Smithy. And he was an old guy, very clever engineer, very clever guy. And he would never work on a workbench. He would roll about on the floor. And we used to call him the human swab, because he'd be rolling around in all the oil that had leaked out of the bike, and he just looked like an oily thing most of the time. But a very clever guy, and very kind-hearted, very nice bloke. So I said, well, that's the last moped. I said to Barrett, I said, that's the last moped. I said, don't think we've got any more to do. And Andy come out and he said, how you getting on? I said, the last one all finished now. And he said, yeah, no, you ain't quite finished yet. I've got van full. I said, oh, no more of them. He said, yeah, just one more van. He said, I brought them from home this morning. I said, right. So we quickly got through those. We did all those on the Monday. You know, a whole van full, we got them running, and the ones that weren't going to run, we put on one side. And he loaded up all the old project stuff that wasn't going to run, and he put it all away, took it all home before his wife saw it. And that's it. He just kept having me there every day, and I was there for 26 years. 26 years, amazing. I'd go there because my work's seasonal. When the earth moving season finished, I'd go down there and winter down there because it was just a nice place to go, you know. Always in something interesting to work on. But after we'd finished the mopeds, this is where we get to the Royal Enfield bit now. After we finished the mopeds, Andy said, right, your next job. And I said, not more mopeds, please. And he said, no, something a bit bigger than that. Come and have a look at this. So we went over to the corner of his building, and in the darkness of the corner there was a project. There was a frame, a couple of wheels, tyres, a petrol tank, mud guards, and 2 tea chests full of mechanical bits. So I said, what is it then? He said, Royal Enfield KX 1140 V-twin. I said, what era is that from then? He said, 30s. I think this one's 35, he said. I said, why is it all in bits? He said, oh, I don't know. He said, why does anybody pull anything to bits and then sell it to me? I said, I don't know. He said, you could be the man. I said, I could be the man to do what? He said, to put this together. I said, well, I don't know nothing about them. He said, you got a brain, you'll work it out. He said, we got the bonus. He said, I've got one upstairs. He said, Smithy built for me years ago. I've kept it. It's a dead original old bike. He said, we'll get it down in a minute. So we got this other KX 1140 down. There's a solo. And he said, you can have that next to you. You can work off it then, can't you? And I said, yeah, okay. Sounds like a plan. And it was a nice bike, the one that Smithy had put together. And I started putting it together, and Smithy came in one day and he said, hey, what are you doing, boy? I said, Royal Enfield cut. Yeah, is that the one I put together? He ain't still got that bugger, is he? I said, yeah, he's still got it. He said, the old bugger. Thought he sold that years ago. I said, well, no, he hadn't. I'm working off that. He said, oh, you'll have fun with that. There's 17 spacers around the engine, he said, and they're all different lengths, and you've got to get them in the right order, otherwise you can't get the gearbox to line up. I thought, wonderful. And I'd only got a parts book, but Brian let me struggle for a little while, and then he come over and he said, I did write down the lengths of all the spacers when I put it together in case we did get another one. We never did. I said, did you? He said, yeah, they're all in the office, in the file. So I went and got them, and there they all are. So I made all the spacers because they're all missing. Got this bike together, and while I was putting it together, I thought, this is a quality bit of kit, you know. They certainly knew what they were doing, Royal Enfield, when they made that. hugely over-engineered. I mean, the crankshaft weighed over 50 pounds. The whole assembly weighed over 50 pounds. It was massive. The side valve. So I put it together and I got it running. And Andy said, you ridden it? And I said, around the yard. I said, that's all. He said, yeah. He said, stick the tray plates on it. You could go for a run on it. So off I went. And I said, well, you'll let her come pick me up if I break down. And he said, yeah, don't ride past too many phone boxes then, because there was no mobile phones back then. Not that we saw anyway. And I did about 9 or 10 miles on it, and that was absolutely lovely. That was torquey old thing. Of course, it had some torque. And I got back, and Andy said, how good is it? And I said, yeah, it runs really nice. I said, you know, we put new rings in it and all the rest of it. But they're a peculiar thing because they've got 4 oil pumps, just like the Bullet. But the Bullet's only got 2, a scavenge and a feed. These have got 4. So we've got all these little oil pumps whizzing around in there, but they all look the same as Bullet ones. And it rather impressed me, you know, that. And I said, yeah, I quite enjoyed doing that one, Andy. That's good. He said, yeah, good, because I bought another one. I've got another project. I thought, what, another KX? He said, yeah. He says, oh boy, had it in the shed, and the shed collapsed. And he said, yeah, I've jumped up and down on the Kickstarter, so I can't move it. He said, I reckon it's seized. And that was seized. So I thought, well, I hope it's not seized on the crank, because we'll never get the barrels off. I said, well, I've got to take the heads off to get the engine out of the frame, because you can't get the engine out of the frame with the heads on. But it's only a ring of bolts on each one, and that's it. No valves in there. The valves are in the cylinders. So I took the heads off, and it was pretty rusty in there. It had water in it. And I said, So I undid the barrel nuts around the base of the cylinders, and the crank wasn't seized, so it let the cylinders come up just enough to clear the studs, both of them. And I thought, that's dead handy, that is, because now I can get the engine out of the frame and split the crankcases from underneath the barrels and get the crank, the conrods, the pistons and the barrels, they're all in one lump. That's all you can do to carry them. Get them in the press, and we can warm up the cylinders and then gently press them out. I remember it took 7 tons on those pistons to move them. And that's with heat on the barrels as well. And well, I got them all apart. We cleaned everything up. I honed all the bores out. Andy got a new set of piston rings in stock, which was handy. So we re-rung it, checked all the oil pumps and everything, checked all the big ends. It was all good. Just been stood. The magneto had got a spark. So I got that one together and rode that one around for 10 miles or so. Another good one. And Andy said, right, seeing as you are a resident Royal Enfield expert, I said, no, I'm not. And he said, yeah, you're all about, he said, you tell me that. He said, you're all about. I said, yeah, but I don't know that much about them. He said, you don't need to. He said, you fathomed it all out. And I said, yeah, with the help of Smithy. He said, yeah, old Brian, he's old now. He said, he don't hardly remember any of this. I said, he knew enough though. He knew where the measurements for the spacers were and that. So Barrett was the BSA man, Smithy was the Norton man, and I turned out to be the Royal Enfield man. And I did not just the KXs, I did 6 KXs altogether for Andy. I've got a picture of the last one that I did for him. I'll put that up now. And that one, the owner had cast his own cylinder heads and made enormous fins on it. And I remember riding that in the summer and went black around the lanes with it and got back, put it on its stand, and there was this hissing noise coming from it. And Barrett says, "Yeah, all right, you've got a puncture." And we looked round it, and it wasn't coming from the tyres, it was coming from the petrol cap. And if you squatted down, you could actually see the fumes coming out of it. The cylinder heads were chucking so much heat out, and it was a still day, it was actually boiling the petrol. So it's a bit of a nightmare really, but that's the bike in the picture. So there I did Model Ks as well, which were 1000cc, did some of those. endless bullets, reddish bullets, constellations, meteors, meteor miners, all sorts of things came in. And you never knew what you were going to work on. But one of the things I did work on, this is a funny thing with Barrett. He said, yeah, while I'm sorting your next project out, see if you can get that Triumph Tigra running. It was a Triumph Tigra scooter, 250. I've never seen one before. Anyway, so I popped the seat up to find out where the engine is, and it was under the seat. And I looked in there, and there's this lovely little all aluminium vertical twin 4-stroke engine, 250cc. So I'm looking at it, thinking that's nice. So I said, yeah, it's in this in here, Barrett. So he came over, he said, what is in? And I said, there's a lovely little engine, look. He went, I said, I'm just thinking, that would be a great engine to put in a little bantam frame, wouldn't it? He went, yeah. So I said, I wonder if Andy's got a spare engine for one of these. So when he came out of the office, I said, you ain't got a spare engine for one of these, have you? He said, well, what's the matter with that one then? I said, nothing. I said, I was just looking for an engine. He said, yeah, why is that then? I said, put it in a bantam frame. He said, might be bits of one in the stores. So anyway, I went to go and get this running, and I pulled the dipstick out, and I thought, oh, no oil in it. So I went and got some oil, and I kept putting oil in it, and eventually I got it halfway up the stick, and I thought, that's enough. And I put loads in. Anyway, I put the dipstick back in and went to kick it over, and it just made squelching noises and shot about a pint of oil out all over the floor. And Barrett started laughing. He said, what have you done? I said, all I've done is put some oil in it. And he popped the seat up and he looked in it, and he only looked for a second or two, and he pulled the dipstick out. He says, this is dipstick? And I said, yeah. So I filled it up halfway, and he started cracking up laughing. And I said, what? And he said, that's not the dipstick. I said, well, what is it? And he says, it's an old choke out of a Cortina or something. And he says, we've got a proper dipstick in the stores, I'll go and get it for you. So he went and got this dipstick, and it was about 4 inches longer than this choke thing that was shoved in the hole. So I put the dipstick in, and it was full to the top. I filled the engine right up to the top with oil, so we had to let loads of that out. Then I got it running, and it ran all right. It smoked a bit for a little while, but it calmed down. But yeah, so I got to work on loads of Royal Enfields and lots of other bikes as well. And then Andy got a reddish bullet in, and I bought that. And then he started getting some Indian ones in, and I was testing those and thought, yeah, these are all right as well. And before you know it, I've got a collection of Royal Enfields. And that's how I got Royal Enfields. And yes, I do like them. They're very down-to-earth bikes, and not a lot of fuss. Not a lot of fuss at all. And so that is in answer. It's a long answer for a video, but that is why I like Royal Enfields, because they are quality things. They are. You know, you either love them or you hate them, and it's definitely like that with the Indian ones. But there's nothing wrong with the Indian bullets, and the new ones. Yeah, they're an acquired taste, a different kettle of fish, because they're more modern, but they're reliable and they go well. And yeah, so there we are. I've had cats running around here. They're all gone now. I don't know where they're gone. But yeah, I've got the old little 350 there. I should be going out on that in a minute. I can see one of the cats sitting up there. Here she comes. Here she comes. Come on in. Yeah. So that's Amy. And Sooty, I don't know where Sooty's gone. Here he is. Here's Sooty. Yeah. Sooty's Amy's son. And they sort of get on, sort of. You can see what they do, can't you? So there we go. Right, okay, this is plenty long enough, this video. You'll be falling asleep now watching it all, so I'll see you on the next one then. Bye bye.